the beginning of the movie, a newlywed couple named Francis and his wife Julia were introduced. Julia, an American, and her Romanian spouse, Francis, had recently moved to Bucharest due to a work transfer. Unbeknownst to Julia, Francis had an encounter with a Romanian taxi driver when they arrived in Romania. When their cab gets to their new apartment, they see someone odd looking at Julia from a window next to them. She isn't currently focusing on it, though. The couple is greeted and given a tour of their new apartment by the apartment's owner. In their apartment, they see a large picture window overlooking another building across the street. That night, Julia couldn't sleep, so she goes to the window to rest. Once again, she sees someone watching her from the other building, but she chooses to ignore it and attempts to get some rest. The following morning, Julia finds herself awake and alone to read a message from Francis informing her that he didn't want to wake her up. She spends her day cleaning the house, interrupted by the cacophonous shouting and dancing of her neighbor next door. As the days go by, she makes the decision to study Romanian and tour the city, but because she can't converse in the language, her life in the nation becomes more repetitious and lonely. She notices the same man watching her from the adjacent building one day when she peeks out the window. Remarkably, she decides not to tell Francis about it when he gets home, and the two of them have a great evening. On their walk back home, they happen to come upon an ambulance and multiple police officers at what appears to be a crime scene. Francis asks the woman they are questioning about the incident, but she seems oblivious, suggesting that something terrible has happened. The earlier crime scene makes sense when they later learn on TV that a woman's lifeless body was found in a home close to their apartment. The man in the ambulance had discovered the body. The discovery of a possible killer nearby worries Julia, and she eventually informs Francis about the man who had been observing her from the building across the street. However, Francis dismisses her worries, calling them the product of her paranoia, and asks her to make dinner for his visiting colleagues. Simon, one of Francis's co-workers, makes conjectures about a potential connection to another crime based on the news reports of a headless body that have recently been discovered. Simon soon expresses his conviction that a serial killer known to the police as the Spider is at large. Julia bumps into Irina, her neighbor, when she's bringing out the trash. Irina urges Julia to let her know if she ever gets too loud again and apologizes for her previous noisy conduct. The following day, Julia discovers a newspaper containing the name of the most recent murder victim and begins searching for English language articles regarding it. Her research indicates that Bucharest is home to a serial killer. She even watches an interview with a survivor who recounts how she was attacked in her own home after being harassed for a few days. The killer stayed by her side while she died, suffocating her with a pillow and slashing her neck with a knife. Julia is very troubled by this graphic story and starts to worry that someone is following her around the city. She chooses to go to the movies and watch an English language film in order to unwind. There are lots of empty chairs around, but a man comes over and takes a seat just behind her. When he leans in closer to her, she becomes even more terrified because she can't see his face. Julia rushes out of the theater. She went to grocery shop afterward, and there she meets the enigmatic stranger once more. On her approach to the supply room, she accidentally knocks over a pickle jar out of fear and notices the man observing her. Julia leaves via the rear door as a furious coworker approaches her. She is so terrified that she finds it difficult to complete her daily tasks. After Julia tells Francis about the event at the store, they decide to watch the CCTV footage from that day again. As she watches the video, Julia snaps a picture of the ominous figure. Conversely, Francis doubts that Julia was being followed and attributes it to a miscommunication. He makes the observation that she was staring at him, which is why the man had been staring at her. Anxious that she could run into the mysterious man again, Julia spends the entire day in her apartment. That evening, she hears several loud knocks on her door, which startles and terrifies her. Though Julia can't understand her because of the language barrier, she reluctantly answers the door to find an elderly Romanian woman pleading for help. Julia finds out that the elderly woman's cat has vanished when her neighbor Irina fills in to provide translation. She says she needs help finding the cat. After persuading the woman to go, Irina invites Julia over for drinks. As they are enjoying a nice conversation, Irina's volatile ex-boyfriend bangs on the door and yells in Romanian. Irina controls the situation and gives Julia comfort, telling her not to worry about anything. She even shows Julia the handgun her ex-boyfriend gave her for protection. Julia decides to confront the man when she gets back to her apartment to find out if he is really observing her or if her suspicions are unfounded. She chooses to wave at the enigmatic man standing in the window, as she usually does. Her terror increases when he waves back. She lets Francis know what's going on and asks that a police officer be called when he gets home. She thinks the man is the same one who previously followed her. Despite not being persuaded by Julia's allegation, the officer and Francis consent to investigate the man's apartment building next door. Francis, however, leaves with nothing since the police claim the man has broken no laws and that they are powerless to intervene. He suggests that it's logical to assume he's shopping at the same place, even if it's not the same individual. After a heated argument sparked by Julia's mounting displeasure with Francis, she feels scared, alone, and uncomfortable in a strange area. Julia chooses to follow the enigmatic man once she encounters him in town the following day. After doing some research, she finds an underground strip bar where the man seems to be employed as a cleaner. She's shocked to learn that Irina is one of the actors and stops to clarify the situation. She is informed by Irina that she has never seen the man before and that the cleaners are changed every day. Irina pledges to keep an eye on Julia's welfare, although Julia is startled by the stranger breaking into her house that evening. It turns out to be a nightmare. When she hears a scream coming from Irina's apartment, she freaks out and begs the landlady to help her open the door. After opening the apartment is empty, save for a cat, which the old woman removes. Everyone accuses the cat of making the noise. After this incident, the landlord complains to Francis about Julia's erratic behavior, expressing her want to avoid having troublesome tenants in her building. After recognizing his absence had contributed to Julia's illness, Francis apologizes. When Julia tries to get in touch with Irina's employer, they are unaware of her whereabouts. Julia finds her ex-boyfriend knocking on Irina's door later that day. She asks for Irina's phone number and lets him know about her strange disappearance. They hear Irina's phone ringing inside the apartment, even though no one is there. Once Julia notices the man working at the same club as Irina, she persuades her ex-boyfriend to come with her to the apartment across the street. Upon their arrival, the locked door is challenged by Irina's ex-boyfriend, who warns anyone inside to stay away from Julia. He leaves abruptly when no one answers, telling Julia to get in touch with him if she hears anything about Irina. When he's gone, Julia walks up to the door and convinces the renter to open it. Julia encounters the scary man as she descends the stairs. He happens to live in the same building. She rushes out of the building via the elevator. Later that evening, Mr. Weber, the grocery store employee, and the same policeman they had earlier called show up at their home. Mr. Weber wants to file charges because he believes that Julia and Francis have been harassing and stalking him and his father. After intervening to resolve the dispute, the policeman persuades both parties to shake hands in show of reconciliation. Francis tells Mr. Weber that the serial killer has been captured after his visit. Upon viewing his mugshot in the news story, Julia recognized him as the man she saw inside the ambulance that evening. His criminal history and prior employment with the victim are linked to the crimes in the news article. Francis is hoping that Julia will be able to get over her dread of Mr. Weber and her suspicions about him now that the killer has been captured. Francis then attends his office party with Julia. Simon's crude comment during the party that Julia isn't bored in their apartment because she's working on a spider, a reference to the serial killer, infuriates Julia. She leaves the gathering despite Francis' best efforts to follow her, sensing that the group is making fun of her in Romanian. During their ensuing confrontation, Francis expresses his wrath towards her worries and fears. Julia is shocked to see Mr. Weber in the distance as she takes the train to return home. She is startled as the train stops and Mr. Weber sits across from her. He acknowledges that he has been staring at strangers since his life has become monotonous because of his cleaning and caring duties for his sick father. Seeing other people smile brings him happiness. He scares Julia as she sees a scary plastic bag with him. She apologizes before boarding the train and leaving for home. Fed up with Francis's absence and doubts, Julia starts packing her belongings, but she is interrupted by music coming from Irina's apartment. She enters and discovers Irina's body decapitated and the door unlocked, only to be ambushed from behind. Upon regaining consciousness, she discovers Mr. Weber, who validates her worries. He tells the story of how he killed Irina and hid her body in the closet, while Julia and the landlady were investigating. As Julia, bleeding profusely on the ground, reaches for Irina's gun, she passes out. Weber stays with her till her breathing stops. Francis hears Julia's phone ring next door while he is phoning her. Weber's actions are being observed by a young girl across the street who is encouraging him to think about hurting her as well. A stunning turn of events occurs when Weber runs into Francis as he leaves the flat. Numerous bullets from Julia kill Weber. At the end of the movie, a shocked Francis confronts his bleeding wife, who had just pretended to pass out moments before, and she finally acknowledges that she was right all along. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.